Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Both Laugh, the Dying Scene Quarantine Chats. This is now episode 12. We took a month or so off there to sort of recalibrate, and we're back. Yeah, episode 12. I'm really excited about tonight. The great Will Hoge is going to join us. If you are familiar with him, you know what a kick-ass songwriter he is and has been for a long time. If you're not familiar with him, then I think you're going to be pretty pleased. So while we wait for Will to show up and let the room populate a little bit, I'll just kind of ramble. Those of you that do know Will, especially on the punk rock side of things, probably know him from, maybe know him from his slot opening for Social D. A couple of years ago, he did a pretty lengthy tour with Social Distortion. We'll talk about that. I have seen him with Lucero. We can talk about that. Let's see. He has been a Nashville guy, born and raised, which is not the case for a lot of Nashville people, particularly in the music industry. He has spent some time working as a songwriter, which to me is a really bizarre and fascinating thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about the sort of Nashville thing and all that it has become. We'll talk about any number of things. Maybe we'll talk about basketball. Maybe we'll talk about his music. Maybe, I don't know. So once Will checks in, we'll get rolling. Hi, everybody that has joined so far, or as is now the case, most people just watch these when they're on IGTV or when they're on YouTube so that you can fast forward through me just stammering at you for a while. I don't see Will yet. Will, if you're there, there's Will. If you just hit the little request button, then we'll get going. And if I don't see that, then I can try to request you, Will, and then we'll hook up. I get nervous every single one of these that we do, that it's not going to work for some reason. Let me, since I don't see a request coming in, let me try to request you. Well, hang on a sec. And if I screw this up, I'll start over. Oh, there we go. Fingers crossed that this is going to work. Hey, there you are.
Get it. All right.
I get nervous every single one of these that we do, like the Instagram live thing.
Yeah.
This is episode 12, and every time I get like, oh shit, is it going to work? Is it going to work? Is it going to work?
It's the fourth or fifth one I've done, and every time something goes slightly wrong. So it's not you, I promise. It's me.
So far, so good, though. So fingers crossed. Can you hear me okay? This all right?
Yeah, you all right?
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for coming on. I really have been looking forward to this. Really probably should have done it a couple album cycles ago, but I get lazy sometimes.
Well, better late than never. That's all right.
Yeah, this is episode 12 of our little Instagram-based chat series. I like to pretend that I'm a writer. So I used to do like sit down phone interviews and write up a story. And then our site kind of shit the bed a few months ago. And I said, well, I can't be a writer anymore. And now there's no shows to go take pictures at. So let's figure out something else to do. So we kind of pivoted, and now we do the live interview thing. And we've never met before. If I start asking things that you don't feel like talking about, by all means, just give me the high sign and I'll move on. I don't want to like trap people, and it's not gotcha journalism or anything like that by any stretch. So yeah, we've never met before, aside from maybe, I think I might have given you a head nod at the Lucero block party a year or so ago down in Memphis, which was a shit show of a day, but it was awesome and unique.
Yeah, it was really proof, though, just how cool those guys and their fans really are. Because it really could have been, I mean, there's nothing you can do about the weather. The weather's a shit show, and, it is what it is. But I thought that they just did about as good a job. You know, it's kind of like somebody coming up and handing you a hand grenade and pulling the pin and running away, and they just
Right.
fucking dove on it. And it was pretty cool. I mean, it was still a cool thing to get to be a part of, and it was really cool with their fans. You know, you also have people that
Yeah.
easily started to be ugly about things. And I think everybody just kind of got it and was supportive, so it was a cool thing.
Yeah,
Terms, but that's okay.
yeah, right. It was we usually fly down for that every year, and then so this year they were gonna because I'm from the Boston area.
Yeah.
We were gonna fly down this year. They were gonna move it to June because it always rains that weekend in April. Like it doesn't matter. They used to do it in Arkansas. They've done it in Memphis, and
Yeah.
it pours sideways every year. So they said, you know what, we'll move it to June, and then pandemic happened.
Yeah, you just can't get away from it. It's like we all had really good intentions for things this year, then they just all got shit on. So here we are.
Well, and one of the first of these shows that I did once quarantine started was with a friend of mine who lives in East Nashville, and he kind of reminded me that they had the tornado go through, and then pandemic happened. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch of just devastation down there.
Really bookended into one another. I mean, it was truly like, you know, the tornado was on a Tuesday, and by the next Tuesday is where the first bit of people that, you know, that really saw how serious this was, we all kind of started canceling shows and hunkering down. So yeah, it was 2020's been a bit of a dick kick, you know, but we all just keep on dealing with it, you know. That's all we can do.
The thing is that 2016 was a bit of a dick kick, and then 2017, and then 2019.
Well, I got kids that are 13 and 10, my boys, and we were sitting around last night doing something, and you know, my oldest turned 13 during quarantine, which is already kind of screwed up. But he just looked at we were watching the news and kind of having dinner and talking about things, and he just looked across the table, kind of disgusted, and he said, "Dad, this has been the longest 4 years of my life." And I said, buddy, I said, actually, 2020 has been the longest 4 years of my life. So
yeah, seriously.
Yeah, man.
I've got a daughter. My daughter's 12 and a half, so it's like going into 7th grade, and all that entails, which is, frankly, a mental clusterfuck anyway for most kids. And then you factor this into it, and I'm sort of in awe sometimes of the way that, because I don't know that I could have adapted to just homeschooling for 4 months, not seeing my friends for the foreseeable future, transitioning into new schools and all that stuff. Like I don't know how we would have done it.
No, well, I would have shit the bed and been terrible at it. I can tell you that. I mean, you know, I'm constantly the frustration that we're talking about, you know, that starts 4 years ago. The only thing that keeps me sane about half the time, I mean, it's a mix of rock and roll and then watching my kids and their friends be really unfazed, and not in an unknowing way, but just in a, it's just what we have to, I mean, you know, we're putting them through active shooter drills and just stuff that, you know, good Lord, I can't imagine having to do that. And then I watch them do it and still be empathetic to all of the other kids in the neighborhood and the community at large. Like the you know, the public school where they go to school is a real diverse mix of not only different colors, but different socioeconomic situations. And it's just a cool thing to really watch them. We'll be fine. The world will be fine if we can just get out of the way and let them eventually take over. We'll be
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, whenever they sent home the first notice of an active shooter drill, like that they were going to do trainings, up here we call them Alice training. I don't know if that's a regional thing or if that's a national thing, but whenever they sent home that first sort of warning that they're going to do an active shooter drill, I kind of went, oh my God, wait, what? Like, I know school shootings are a thing. They obviously have been everywhere for 20 years now.
Yeah.
But the fact that we actually teach kids, it's not just like a fire drill. And my dad said, well, yeah, that's like during the Vietnam War when we had air raid drills and you had to hide under a desk and cover your head. And as though that was going to protect you from a nuclear explosion in New Hampshire.
You know, at least the government at that point did something to try to keep people from invading our country. You know, at this point, the thing that sucks is all we're doing is active shooter drills. They're not doing anything. There's no legislation being passed to make that more difficult. There's no healthcare being passed to make mental health something that's more attainable for people. You know, hell, it's still a stigma we can't hardly talk about. So, you know, it's disappointing to watch the only real leadership just comes from our own individual homes and our little community schools and things like that. It's kind of discouraging and encouraging all at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, it really is. And to be a kid now, that just kind of makes you, I guess, appreciate how we had it when I was 12, 30 years ago. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we didn't, that's all they know now. So I guess, I don't know. It's a weird new normal.
And then are y'all going back? Have they announced yet? Are your kids going back to school in the fall, or have they said?
We're figuring that out. As of right now, there are 3 different options, which makes it sort of seem like there's no options. The options are just continue with homeschooling, or go back full time and all the kids wear masks and socially distant, which that is impossible in middle school and high school, and some sort of hybrid of the two. So it's really all of the options are on the table, and we'll figure it out when we get there at this point.
Yeah, they're supposed to announce. They're announcing. My wife works in the schools too, and they're announcing tomorrow that they're gonna keep everybody here home at least through Labor Day, I guess, and then they'll kind of reassess over those 8 weeks of if they can then send kids back to school or if they'll keep it closed, you know, and do distance learning through the holidays, through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and try again at the first of the year. Just crazy.
When does school normally start down there? Because we're later. We're usually just after Labor Day anyway, but I know a lot of my friends in Tennessee, it's like August.
They start August 4th this year, which part of my year was always post-Labor Day. You kind of had all of August off, and then you went back that, first week, second week of September maybe. But that's changed, and I don't know a real good reason of why. But, so we're going back in August at this point. Well, staying home and starting again in August.
Yeah. Do they at least have, for the middle school age, like a decent online learning thing? Like my little town, thankfully, and I know that this is super privileged of me to say, but I live in a upper middle class town, and we've had access to, like, all the kids have access to computers. We have good internet. Those are things that I don't take for granted about where we live. But we've also had sort of an online learning platform for a couple years, because we used to have so many snow days, so that would push the end of the school year out to almost July 1st, and then it's a contract thing and whatever. So they started this online learning thing, so every time we have a snow day, we don't have to make it up, but the kids have to do online stuff. So then they just sort of expanded that for quarantine. So at least the kids kind of know it a little bit, but I know people in a lot of other places that they don't have access to that. Yeah. They had to make it up as they went along.
Yeah, and that was hard. I mean, especially the end part of last year when they really jumped in and a lot of kids didn't have computers or internet access. And they've been working over these last few months to make sure. I mean, there's been thousands and thousands of computers that have been ordered, so they'll make sure that kids have computers. And then Wi-Fi, I think there's worked out a deal with Verizon or AT&T. There's going to be some mobile hotspots throughout the city to really try to make sure that kids will have access to everything. I mean, it's going to be hard to pull off, but the school board, Dr. Battle, who runs everything here in Nashville, is a really, really bright leader and is doing all she can. So I mean, they'll figure out a way to make it work, but it's gonna take time. Not be something that's seamless for sure.
Yeah, and it's really different. Like, I mean, I think our school board and our school's administration did a good job of sort of getting the kids to realize that this isn't permanent. Like, we'll all get through it together. We'll have a good time. No stress. Like, we don't want school to stress you out because everything is stressful enough. But the longer it goes on, the kids also have to learn.
Yeah.
Not to solve all the world's education problems, but let's talk about tiny little movies.
That's a far more invigorating topic. Yeah.
Hold on, I'm just going to shut my window. My neighbor decided now was a good time to mow the lawn. So I don't want you to end up hearing that. Hang on.
Sorry.
All right, that's at least a little better. Let's talk about tiny little movies. Another great album to add to collection. I was trying to, without Wikipedia and go by memory, by what number album this is in the Will Hoge catalog, and I lost count. 12, 13, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think that's about right for studio records, and then if you get into live records and EPs, I think it goes up to 18 or 19. I don't count them anymore. I just try to keep forward.
That, I've got to say that I'm always impressed by people that get this long into a career and keep with that level of proficiency or whatever the word is with when it comes to songwriting. A lot of times, guys out of the gate, whatever genre you're in, unless you're Willie Nelson, it's sort of front load the beginning of your career with a lot of albums, and then for whatever reason things slow down as you get older. But it's like clockwork. You've always got new music coming out, which I think is really awesome.
I just don't know any other way to do it. I mean, I want to be an I am an artist. I feel like I'm an artist, but I also come from more workman-like upbringing and background. And I mean, it's not to be unartistic, but it's a job. I mean, that's part of what my job is to wake up in the mornings and try to make, write a song or tell a story and make records. So I hope that that's something that always continues. And I also try real hard not to overthink it, because I think that you can. So it's a weird balance, I think, when you get to this point in your career. It's like, because you could really overthink it and go, okay, well, I've already made this. I can't do that because it's too much like this. You can always talk yourself out of making a record. It's real easy to do, and I just push myself through that fear and kind of the other direction, and that I would much rather put a record out and take the lumps of people not liking it or ripping it apart than I would be so precious with things that folks never hear anything. You never get negative feedback, but you also never put a fucking record out.
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Right. I think it was it might have been the review that No Depression did, and I wrote it down because I really liked the quote. They talk about this album as 11 distinct little nuggets, and that while Will Hoge's native tongue is rock and roll, he's fluent in a wide range of sonic languages. And I wish I had written that line because it's really great.
Yeah, that's real flattering, but I think that I think I've always tried for that to be the case. And and in your career, when you do this, you first make records. It's a real thing that will put. You have to be compared to something. They have to always go, oh, it's like the Allman Brothers, or it's like the Black Crowes, or it's like Oasis, whatever the comparison is, and
Yeah.
it always made me laugh because we would get these comparisons that, didn't make any sense. Like you can't say he sounds like Bob Seger and the Sex Pistols. Like that's not really a thing, like.
I legitimately just spit my seltzer out. That was awesome.
Thought of that, though, is pretty funny. Now, that doesn't mean you can't like Bob Seger and the Sex Pistols, but the two don't sound remotely alike. And so I think that
No.
me doing exactly what I do for 20 years for people, to finally go, oh, maybe it just does sound like him, and is there some influence from the country world? Yes. Is there influence from the rock and roll world, the punk world, and the pop world? Yeah, all of those things are a part of it, but it's not. I don't want it to be one of those things. That sounds really uninteresting to me as a writer and as an artist.
Do you go into writing an album that, all right, last time was maybe a little more country or a little more rock and roll or a little more soul, or I want to focus on this with this batch of songs, or does it just kind of happen that way?
It's not premeditated in that, like, I don't sit with nothing on the page and go, okay, I'm going to write a country-ish record. For me, writing all the time, I'm just trying to finish whatever the song is that sort of presents itself and shows up. And, you know, maybe you've got a little story idea and you can kind of know it's a fast song or a slow song or it's sad. I mean, you know, sometimes there's a direction like that, but then the record making process comes later because there's always just, you know, a few dozen songs laying around, and then they start to sort of categorize themselves or coalesce together, and you kind of go, you know, like something was like the record before with My American Dream, those songs were all social political commentary. So those kind of fall in line fairly naturally. And then there's other ones, you know, if you do get a batch of tunes that kind of feel like a body of work, then sometimes, you know, when you get 6 tunes together, maybe that like that feels like a thing, then sometimes you're shooting a little bit for what would work in that basket. But it's more casting for the record after the songs are written than it is really writing for the project, for me anyway.
Was the last one a little more, maybe, I don't know, I hate to use the word political because I feel like that's not the right word, but it's the word that comes to mind. But was the last one maybe a little more explicitly social commentary because Anchors felt like it was a little more of a personal or character-driven album? So was that, because the Anchors was what, the first album, I think, of the Trump administration. Okay. I hate even saying his name, but like the first album of yours of this administration, but it wasn't really political. But then it seemed like, okay, after enough time had kind of settled in, then you could really dive into it that way. Maybe that's just the way that I read it, but.
No, I don't, that's one of those beautiful, when we were making the Anchors record, that was that beautiful moment where I wasn't, Trump didn't totally occupy my thought yet at that point.
Right.
Much to my, you know, my dismay, I think that I really didn't think he was going to win the election. So I don't know that I was sitting around worried sick about that yet.
Right.
But, you know, the Anchors thing was an interesting record to make because at the time, before that, I'd gotten really burned out. I had a group of guys together. We had made the Small Town Dreams record and had toured a bunch, and it was just it was the wrong combination of guys in the band. It was all really good players, but it had changed some during the making of the record, and we did a lot of touring on it, and it was just never, it was very rarely great. It was always really good, and sometimes we flirt with greatness, but there was always it's just a lot more work than it should have been. I got real burned out, and so I took some time away from doing anything with a band. I just toured for about a year by myself, and that's when I started writing a lot of the songs for Anchors, and I put together a band of just dudes that I loved in Nashville that play in different bands and do different things. And, so I think that record was really made with just me wanting to fall in love with the process again, and kind of just being in a room with guys that I was really impressed with, like as players and as dudes, and it just really refocused me on the process. And so I've really loved that record. It didn't do much. It was one that was a weird time. It felt like when it came out, I don't mean like in the commercial success world, it wasn't hugely successful. It wasn't, but that's not what I'm saying. I mean, it just,
Right.
I felt like I put that record out and it just didn't feel like anybody paid much attention to it. And it was a weird time, but I was so excited about it because it really made me feel like an artist again. And then shortly after that, we put together a band to go on the road. And I hadn't had what I felt like was like a really strong, super powerful rock band in my pocket in a while. And when we did that, started songs for My American Dream, we made that record with that touring band. And then that really solidified the band being kind of a permanent thing. So it was that, as much as anything, probably propelled those next 2 records, was really having Chris on bass and Tom and Alan on guitar and drums. Those things were really solidifying for me as a writer and then as a producer and trying to make records.
I was going to say, does having a band like that change the way that you write or the way that you like certain sounds or certain styles that you might not be able to get away with other players, but because you have like this tight knit thing, does that sort of change the way that you write a song?
It doesn't change the way I write them, but it does change some of the conversations as far as production and parts. And I try really hard. I've always wanted this to be it's by no means a democracy. It's a, I mean, you know, and I think the guys in the band would tell you that, but it's also not this, it's not this authoritarian thing where I'm coming in and telling people constantly what to
Yeah.
play. I mean, part of you want a band around you is these guys that bring in their own flavor and their own ideas. So I feel like with this group, everybody's got solid ideas and just the right amount of ego. So there's a great moment. Like I can say, you know, hey man, what if we tried a different guitar part or a different drum? And nobody's bitching. Everybody's musical well is deep enough to really try something different, not be offended by that. And likewise, if, you know, somebody comes to me and goes, man, I really like, you know, what if the chorus sounded different? You know, I want to try that and see what it sounds like. So that's been really hugely beneficial. Arrangement wise, it's changed, and just kind of approach wise in the studio, it's changed. But writing wise, I don't feel. I guess I feel less locked in probably than ever, because I do feel like I can really explore whatever it is, and everybody will just try to come up with a cool part around it, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah. And that you trust them to be able to do that, which I'm sure is not always the case.
No, and it's, you know, and it's nice too. I mean, having made enough records over the years with my own bands and different incarnations of that, and then, you know, having worked with really great studio players, I mean, you start to realize the strengths and weaknesses of both of those things. I mean, you know, there's dudes in Nashville, I mean, that you can get that are just, they're the best musicians around. I mean, that you can come and they can come in and play your whole record, you know, top to bottom. You can record a record in 3 hours, really and truly.
Yeah,
But is it great? I mean, it'll be right, but will it be great? And there's a huge difference in those two things. And you know,
yeah, right.
I caught myself for a little while, I think, trying to be too good, like really and truly, like trying to make things that were like, this has to have a certain palatability, like to get across. You know, it can't have the edges be too rough or have it be too scruffy, you know, here and there. And it's really over these last couple records, there were always moments of it, but I think that finally, just over time and getting more confident even in what I'm doing as a producer and as a band leader and as a writer, really being able to let the warts and all kind of stay on sonically, it's become a lot more interesting, I think, to listen to.
Is that a Nashville thing? Not to paint with too broad a brush, but to have all of the warts removed and everything sort of polished and nice. It strikes me as though that's kind of a Nashville thing, or at least a newer Nashville pop country thing.
I don't think it's a Nashville thing. Yes, I think it's a Nashville thing, but I don't think it's exclusively Nashville. I think it's a professional thing.
Fair enough.
I noticed it even when we worked in LA or New York. When you get to a certain level, and a lot of it stems from major label stuff and really needing things to fit on a larger format, you know, that's something that can really work at pop radio. And when I say pop radio, I don't mean musically pop, but like popular radio, a big radio format. It's just got to fit in a narrow box, because it has to sound like everything else that whatever that format is playing. And so I think you get songs that are incredibly homogenized, and they just start to sound a lot like everything else. And then most of them aren't very successful. And then these ones come along that sound different and unique, and that's the ones that start to make a difference. So, I mean, I think Nashville is very guilty of it, but I don't think that's geographic. I think it's really more of folks that are trying to attain this sort of shiny, perfect picture that's important and isn't.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I sort of meant in a pop, as in popular music radio thing. And speaking of, they all sort of sound homogenized. There's a guy who every year does a mashup of, I think it's the top 8 or 10 pop country songs, runs them all together and sort of flips between them, but it's brilliant.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, and it's really interesting to watch, you know, when you get these big time session dudes that play on all those records, and a lot of them are, you know, our age, like rock and roll dudes that just aren't on the road anymore, and they're phenomenal players, and they've realized they can make a living staying home and playing on shitty country songs. And you know, but it's funny, like those guys, they just go in and it is like, I mean, they're looking at a number chart, they're not listening to the songs, they're not paying any attention to a lyric. It is full. It is 5, 2 minor, 4, 1. Okay, I'm gonna play this lick with this setting on my guitar. I mean, it is as unsexy as, you know. I guess it's like I had a friend once that went on set and watched a porno get filmed, and he was like, "It is the most sterile." Like, you think after you watch it, like, this is gonna be sexy and so hot,
right?
And in the process, it's like, this is the most sterile. Nobody here is in this at all. Like, getting paid to make weird faces and act like you hope at the end you can fool a bunch of lonely dudes in their bedroom that this is what love is.
Right.
And it's a trip to watch, man. But I don't have any desire to make those records, really.
That is the thing that I have always been fascinated by, because I mean, whatever, this is a punk rock sort of based website, and so that's sort of my zone. And so the fact that, like, that there are people who are just professional songwriters and professional studio musicians is a thing that blows my mind every time. It's such a foreign sort of concept to me that I know is kind of what Nashville is, and I know there are other places like that as well.
Yeah.
But it's such a foreign concept to me.
Well, and you know, and it's so interesting to think, because there are other great, I mean, there's some great songs from Nashville. I mean, there's lots of great stuff that comes out of here that's formed, you know, in those writing sessions and in those studio sessions. And there have been over the years, and also, you know, all that great old Motown stuff. I mean, that was just writers sitting in factory like churning shit out, and studio wise too. I mean, the difference is you just had really great songs and really great players, whereas a lot of the stuff that's happening in Nashville is really bad songs and really great players. You know, they're just like, you can't polish a turd, but they're gonna roll it around in glitter, and that's pretty much what they're doing. Just taking songs by really shitty artists, and then you put world-class dudes and girls and sing on it. And I mean, it'll sound pro. It'll sound like a big old professional turd. Yeah, it's great.
I'm gonna have to remember that. You can't polish a turd, but you can cover it in glitter. And I guess maybe, I mean, I know that the Motown thing is like that. Memphis is certainly like that with Stax Records and whatever. I grew up in New Hampshire. Like, our musical landscape in New Hampshire was Aerosmith, probably. That's it. Like, if you look at the Wikipedia page for the music of New Hampshire, it's like Gigi Allen was born there, and Ronnie James Dio was born there, and Mandy Moore was born there. But then she left when she was like 6 months old. That's what we had. So I grew up, like, I listened to Springsteen. Why? Because my dad listened to Springsteen almost exclusively. Mm-hmm. But so that was what I grew up listening to. So that sort of workman, singer, songwriter, blue collar, bootstraps, John Mellencamp sort of thing was what I grew up on. And then so to realize that all this other stuff exists, but exists almost in songwriting factories, in music making factories, was like I had learned a new language when I started sort of absorbing that as I got older.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, you know, because I grew up, I mean, I grew up here, and so the songwriting thing was kind of always around. I mean, you always knew that it existed. You had friends that's parents were songwriters or song pluggers, which is shit when you say other places, they're like, what's a song plugger? But, you know, I grew up more with that idea of, you know, you were in a band because like you needed friends, like you had to have a gang to just
Well,
have,
right.
you know, and that was what I was always interested in. And I just always thought it was to try and be great. And the sort of punk rock attitude, I mean, even though my music real early on, it was still middle of the road based, you know, right down the middle kind of straight rock and roll stuff that you know, it incorporated a few different things, but the punk rock attitude is what I always really liked. And not that we don't give a fuck whether we're good or not, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
we give a fuck and we're going to do this the way we want to do it. And that was what was, I think, for confusing a lot of the times, even starting out, because my music, there's an accessibility and some pop sensibilities too. I love melody and I love choruses and things that you can really latch on to. I mean, I always have. So I think that all these labels would, you know, they would hear that and go, okay, so we can polish this up and make it a thing. And where there was always a rub was still that, you know, there were also just certain things I wasn't gonna do. I mean, I was still, you know, the sort of punk ethos mentality, even when it didn't necessarily shine through in my music, it still stayed there attitude wise. I mean, I didn't get into this so that I could have somebody tell me the kind of records that I needed to make or the shows.
Yeah, right.
Play. So I've always been more attracted to that idea, really.
Yeah, and what I really like about, I think, uh, the sort of punk scene at large, the last, I don't know, I've noticed it the last 10 years or so, is that as some of those guys that got older, guys that were in punk rock bands when they were younger, bands like Hot Water Music and Avail, you realize that you can't play 3-chord punk rock music forever. But so a lot of them started to revisit things like old Merle Haggard records that they grew up on, old Johnny Cash records that they grew up on, and started to focus more on the songwriter thing. So there's a lot of overlap between like the singer-songwriter world, like you did Brian Fallon's show a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
He's a punk rocker from New Jersey. But it's all kind of this one big community now, which I think is really sort of cool. And I was telling a friend of mine is into pop country music, and I was saying, oh, I'm going to have Will Hoge on. He wrote this song, and she knows the Eli Young version. And I said, he's about as punk rock. She's like, why are you going to have him on your show? I said, because he's about as punk rock as it gets. He's not Billy Joe from Green Day,
Yeah.
musically, but he's about as punk rock as it gets when it comes to philosophy nowadays and what he's going to say, and that he's not afraid to put the establishment in check, whether that's the Nashville establishment, the Washington establishment, the establishment in your own house. You know, like it's about as punk rock as it gets. So, but she only knows the Eli Young version of the song.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the real thing, though. And I think that that's the punk rock reality is, you know, what's more punk rock, like you said, than Merle Haggard? I mean, that's
Yeah.
fucking punk rock. I mean, that guy did real prison time and wrote real songs,
Yeah, right,
stories about it.
right,
But, you
right.
know, that is punk rock. And, you know, it was
Yeah,
really cool for us. I mean, like getting to do the Social Distortion tour. I mean, there's not a whole lot to me that's more punk rock than that. And that was strictly because Mike had heard a couple of records that I had made that were very punk rock. Like I thought at the time we had just finished recording My American Dream, which had some of the more aggressive
yeah.
elements. And
One of us froze up there for a second. I don't know if it's me or you. Yeah, I got a little circle on you right now. I don't know if you can hear me at all. Oh, come on. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me at all. I've just got a little circle. Okay, yeah, let's try this again. Can you like, if you're watching right now, can you just give like a thumbs up if you can hear me or if it's choppy on my end, and I'll try to go find Will. Where'd you go? I forget how to do this. Let's see. Will. Oh, okay, so it's not on my end, so it's on Will's end. So let's wait for Will to rejoin because I can't find him. Will, if you're watching, let's try this again. We were just getting somewhere. All right, I'm going to stall for a few minutes. Let's see if Will comes back on. Yeah, he does have to request, but he's, oh, there we go. All right, don't go anywhere if you're watching because we are reconnecting right now. This fucking cliffhanger is exactly right. Oh, we're pending, we're pending. Oh, I got the little floating circle again. Oh, I hate when it cuts off somebody in mid-sentence too. And then it went, all right. Yeah, we're seem to be having connectivity issues. I know, but it was like the train's just about to leave the station and then it derails. So let's try this again. Fingers crossed this time. I didn't cross my fingers last time. Maybe that's why we didn't connect. Oh, come on. I still got that circle thing. Oh, there we are.
And that is all I have to say. That's pretty much, that'll answer all the questions. So good.
It's funny that I don't know if you can see the comments from when you left, but somebody was like, that was a fucking cliffhanger too.
And Mike Ness said, goodbye, I'll talk to you again. So, sorry, that could have been, my kids are playing Minecraft. That could have fucked the whole system up. I don't know. So,
yeah,
I don't remember exactly what we said. I was going to say something along.
Well, what I was going to ask was what you were answering anyway, is basically how did the Social Distortion thing come up?
Oh, yeah.
And then I think that's kind of where it got cut off.
Yeah, so we had made the My American Dream record and hadn't even put it out yet. I mean, there were mixes done and it was kind of getting circulated around within our label and agency and all that. And literally got a call on like a Friday night. It was like, hey, Mike Ness from Social Distortion wants to know if you want to go on tour. And of course, I was like, well, fuck yeah. Because that was one of those bands where I inherited a lot of stuff from my old man and his record. Like I came from a real classic rock background.
Yeah.
Beatles and the Stones and the Allman Brothers and Skinner and James Brown and all of that. Just sort of everything from 64 to 74. Social D was one of those bands that I sort of discovered on my own. Wasn't a hand by my old man. And it was this great mix of, I was just starting to get a guitar at the time, and the songs were really simple in this beautiful classic way. And they were similar. I mean, they were playing revved up Johnny Cash songs, basically.
Yeah, right.
So to get that call, I was like, fuck yeah, I want to do a Social Distortion tour, and
yeah.
I just had, my drummer and I had communed because he grew up in a little town of Mississippi and was the same way. It was just like going on a tour with Social D, like this huge deal. And, we were imagining like, fucking Ness heard this record and he just thinks it's great and he's going to take us out. And it ends up, he hadn't heard the fucking record at all. He had heard my Never Give In record. He had heard when he rented a car and it was on in Sirius XM. And,
wow.
It was far more centered down the middle, classic kind of songwriter record, and not a thing that I would have thought would have landed us a Social Distortion tour.
Yeah.
Ever. And it just ended up, it's one of my favorite tours I've ever done. I mean, those guys were just incredible. And the fan base, it's really cool to watch, this punk rock crowd that really is guys that are 60 all the way down to, people bringing their grandkids and shit to shows, and they they give a shit about songs, man. Like I'll say, it's not like we came on and tried to act like a fucking punk rock band. We're coming on in front of punk rock Jesus and the Disciples. Like, we don't need to be more punk than we're not.
Right.
That would be real fake. So, you know, it was cool to really watch how literate and musically deep that Social D audience was. You know, we would just come out and show that, you tell me to do a 45-minute show, we'll just put on the best 45-minute show we can. We don't cater it like, all right, let's do the hit country show, or all right, let's do the. You know, we would come out and do what felt right in the room that night, and it was just it went over incredibly well, and really receptive audience members that everywhere we've been since, we have somebody come back that, you know, said, saw you on the Social D tour. It's really, really a cool thing to have gotten to do.
Yeah, when I posted that I was going to be talking to you on here, there were a lot of people who said, "Oh, I saw him open for Social D. He's legit." So
yeah,
yeah, I know.
And that's always been. I've always wanted to believe that the music that I make, if you'll just, I tell my booking agent all the time, it's like, if you'll just put me in front of an audience that likes music, like, you know, get us in front of, I don't give a shit who, if it's 1,000 people anywhere and you put us and give us a decent PA, like, I just think we can win people over. I think people want to hear real songs and see them performed in a way that is engaging, and that's what I've always been naive enough to believe that. And you know, there's those moments like that where it makes you feel like you're not fucking crazy. So.
Yeah, so it's got especially to have a new record that is a rock and roll record, for lack of another phrase to use, but it's really a rock and roll record, and the band sounds really tight and they sound really good on it. So it's really got to be a kick in the balls to not be able to go out on the road right now.
It sucks. And, you know, I've been on the road so much for 20 plus years. I very rarely miss it. I mean, just because they're always, I mean, you know, I took 9 weeks off when both my kids were born, and that's about the longest I've ever been at home, you know, and we're very rarely home for more than a 3 or 4 week, you know, sometimes maybe 6 or 8 weeks, if we really intentionally take some time off. But to do it like this, where you're really just not touring, it's hard. I mean, the financial part is what it is, but
you
know, but even just the love of rock and roll part is fucking hard, man. And it's the most I've ever missed it. And especially, you know, we made this record and it was such a great thing, and there was so much excitement making it. Like, even those moments, there's certain things as you're recording that you're going, man, if we really push this, it will kill live. Like, if we can nail this in the recording, like when we go to play this, when people have had the chance to live with this record, like, it's going to just knock heads off. And then, you know, we had even, because I also didn't want to do the thing, I've gotten really frustrated with the idea of bands. It's like, you make your record, you put your record out on a Friday, and you've got to be in your then 10 best markets over the next days. It's like, motherfuckers just got the album at noon today. We're playing their town tonight. Like, they don't even know any of these songs. Like, what's the point? They're just coming to see the same old shit they've always seen, which is cool. But it's sort of defeating. So we had already planned on, you know, record was going to come out in July, and we were going to hit the road in September. And, you know, we've all but given up hope that there's going to be any road hitting in September. And maybe by next July we'll be able to go out and happy.
God, I hope so.
To this, I guess that's how we'll do this now. It's like we'll celebrate the release of the record, and then a year later we'll celebrate the tour for the record, maybe. Yeah,
the 1 year anniversary tour.
The 1 year anniversary farewell, welcome back tour. It's gonna be great.
It's not my favorite song on the album, but I feel like Even the River Runs Out of This Town is the best song on the album. That song is like, I have a favorite for personal reasons, but that song I feel like is the best song on the album. And I feel like it sounds like you kind of knew it too. Like, is that a song that is good enough that when you're recording it, you're like, you know, I think we got one here? Man, is that a thing that happens?
Yeah, it is. And I've kind of felt that when we wrote it. I felt really strongly about it when it was written, and I'll more than that though was we were overseas in the UK. We were playing in Manchester, which has become one of my favorite places and an audience that really gets excited about music. And it was like 400 fucking degrees in the club the night we played, and no air conditioning. Of course, we're all just dying. And I sent the band off for a few minutes to kind of try to cool the room down a little bit and at least sort of mellow out. And
Yeah.
the song had only been written a week or so before, and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna just try it. And played it, and it slayed in front of an audience that had never heard it. I mean, I wasn't even really comfortable with it yet. And that night too, Tom, my guitar player, he mentioned, he was like, man, that's special. He's like, that's something that's really got the thing. And
Yeah.
fuck, I hope you're both right. I mean, those are, yeah. And you never know. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, I've had songs that I feel like, fuck yeah, this is a game changer. And it's like,
Yeah.
and then there's other ones that you write like, that's pretty cool. And people are like, fucking song changed my life. You're like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
saying that, it's one I'm real proud of.
Yeah, I do my best to, when there's an album that I'm looking forward to, I try not to listen to all the singles that come out ahead of it because I like to be old fashioned and actually listen to an album all the way through. And I remember getting to that song, I went, yeah, that's the one. And I have a friend who swears that there's a formula in how you put an album together. And he's like studied track lists and he plays in punk rock bands and whatever. But that the fourth song is always the best song. Like that's where the best song goes. The first one might be the one that catches people's ear. The fourth one is always the best song.
Yeah.
And I remember getting to the fourth song. I went, oh fuck. He's right about that one.
Well, good. Well, I'll have to keep that in mind in the future. So.
Yeah. I don't want to take up your whole night, and this will end up cutting us off before too long. Thanks so much for coming on. This has been a really fun conversation.
Tools, but
yeah, and thank you for doing what you do. And thank you for not being afraid, as I know some people are, about losing an audience because you say things that are maybe the right thing to say. And to me, that's like, it's sort of an old Joe Strummer thing, but without people, you're nothing, right? And so if we're not looking out for each other and calling people on their bullshit, then what are we doing? So I really, really applaud you and guys like you that do that aren't afraid to do that.
And all your folks tuning in too, I know that as an art, this is hard for fans too, and it's really cool to watch in all of these podcasts and all the shows I'm doing from home and all the other artists that are doing it, like folks that are still tuning in every week and supporting through Venmo and PayPal and really keeping lots of bands and crews and venues and record stores and shit going. It's not lost on us all. So thank you guys that are watching too.
Yeah, it's hard. I struggle with even still doing it, especially in light of the George Floyd situation, and that we've all been sort of shown this light of the way that people have been living, that we've been privileged enough to kind of turn our heads to, except every time it happens. And I'm glad that there are people who are okay with talking about stuff during this time.
Yeah,
it's hard, but we need to keep moving those conversations. Your music, what I was getting at is your music helped move those conversations for me years ago. So
yeah, man, I do. And thank you for being willing to, move those conversations. I can write the songs, but if nobody talks about it, it doesn't make a fuck's bit of difference.
Right. Thanks so much, sir. And hopefully sometime before 2023, you'll be back in the greater Boston area and we'll
a Celtics game at some point. So I will look you up for that. I've still yet
Absolutely.
to game, and that's my team. So I got to get up there at some point. So.
Oh, really? Yeah. Maybe I guessed right. Yeah, I grew up playing basketball, and if you grew up in this area in the mid 80s, the Celtics had to be your team.
Yeah.
And I know that people outside of this area hated the Celtics for that very reason, but whatever. Like we were the best.
Yeah, Nashville, the only thing you had was the Hawks remotely nearby, and I was just always a Celtics guy. My best friend and I were going to the Garden the old Garden. We were going to see Larry Bird and that whole crew play, and I can't remember exactly what year. And then fucking Patrick Ewing hit a couple of free throws in like a game 3 and beat him, and it didn't go back to, and we didn't even get to go. So it was just
Oh, that's funny.
gut wrenching, man. So I've never
I,
quite.
I was lucky enough for my dad to bring me to a couple games to watch Larry Bird play, but then there's a really terrible movie called Celtic Pride, which had, I think, Damon Wayans and Dan Aykroyd might be in it. It's probably on Netflix. It's terrible. I'm in that movie. It's the last thing that they filmed at the Boston Garden, and somewhere on my porch here, I have like the foam finger that they gave us. If you, I'm in the audience. So they filmed like a Utah Jazz versus Celtics game. It's the last thing they did at the old Boston Garden. The wrecking ball came in shortly thereafter. I'm in the crowd in that movie.
That's a big moment, man. That's good. So that's got to be on your
and strangely enough, I've never seen the movie because you could kind of tell like it was going to be garbage. So I know.
They kidnap somebody and try to get him to the game, or
yeah,
movie. I think.
Yeah, I didn't make it all the way through the movie.
You were in it, man. You don't have to be. You don't have to see it. You were there.
Exactly. My claim to fame. Right. Thank you, Will. This has been a blast. It's been a long time coming. It means a lot. Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Let's hope this saves correctly. Fingers crossed.